So the structure of my talk is Britain under the thumb of, and I'll be talking about under the thumb of itself, big business, that sort of thing, as well as the EU and the States. And then I'll also be making some comparisons about how the EFF works and how org works and how the governments and the cultures are different and how different approaches yield different results. Now, I live half the year in London and half in the States, so that makes me sort of aware of both, not a master of either. There are absolute policy wonks on the org board and advisory board. Some of them are here. If you want to go deep on some of this stuff, that's who to talk to. One of the funny things about the Digital Economy Act, which is a new law that's also been passed, ostensibly to push the 3 strikes law, is that the copyright industry has been saying this is going to reduce copyright theft by 70%. And this thing was rushed through, but it still hasn't been enacted. But what's really cute is most recently the government asked the copyright industry to pay for it, and suddenly they went, oh, pay for it? Well, and the government said, well, if it's going to reduce piracy by 70%, then it's a fantastic investment, don't you think? Well, the trouble is that the copyright industry has some experience with trying to block piracy, and with not much success. It appears that no one at BPI knows how to use Google, because I don't know about you, but most people don't actually type thepiratebay.se. In fact, I don't even know it's in Sweden. You go to Google, you type Pirate Bay in, and what happens? 1, 2, 3 hits up. The first 3 hits are all live links to the Pirate Bay that Google will happily give you. But apparently BPI, after doing all this lobbying and getting the court to do this, can't actually be asked to have a 14-year-old intern search once a week on Google and give them Pirate Bay proxy list. That seems like an obvious domain to think about. Proxy Bay info. I don't actually know what's going on. This doesn't make sense. The only thing I can think of is that BPI are not stupid. They know this is utterly futile, but they like to keep their jobs. So what they are told is to do something, even if it's futile. Go into court, make a bit of fuss, get in the press, block the Pirate Bay for a day, is what it took. It was blocked for a day. Since no one actually knows it's in Sweden, they just go to Google, they hit I feel lucky, and they go right to it. So, won't somebody think of the children is sort of the British version of terrorism. It's used to pass all sorts of wonderful things. My own little personal annoyance, and you've probably all experienced it, is mobile phone censorship. Since we don't know who could have your phone, it could be a child, we should block sites that mention virtually anything that might be upsetting to a parent. The trouble is, last I checked, kids usually have computers. And none of this exists on computers either. But for some reason, mobile phones, it's okay. Just as open access, for example, applies to computers, but not mobile phones. But there's also a broader question here. Besides being annoying to adults, there's no appeals process, things just get banned. We're going more and more to a mobile, always-on world where stuff is just banned arbitrarily. The second issue is, how are kids even supposed to be educated when they're in this sort of nanny bubble? And they can't actually get information. They search the word breast, or they go to a website about breasts, be they male or female kids. It'll be blocked on their phone. And that's an odd way to think in an odd society that we're building. Okay, so much for the UK. How about under the thumb of the EU? These cartoons were slightly modified by me. You won't find them exactly, but this is kind of the feeling a lot of us in the UK have, is the EU is out there making policies and doesn't really care what the UK has to say. They're not elected in the same way. We don't feel as represented. My feeling is actually, as an American, that the EU is largely actually a positive force for privacy and internet rights. One of the reasons is the bureaucrats there, much like the bureaucrats in the UK, there are a lot of actually decent people there who want to know what civil society should do, what democratic society should worry about. They think longer term. And so there are things, for example, like the EU right to privacy. you know, this doesn't exist in the UK, or it didn't before, it does now. And it's been used in a number of times to kill things that look like creeping privacy invasions. Facebook has run afoul of it, so has Google. Now, the US, again, the copyright industry, the fat cats. The biggest, most recent big threat has been treaties. And the idea behind treaties is to avoid democratic review. The original DMCA, Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which made it illegal in the States to circumvent copy protection, was actually not passed through democratic process in the US. It was very unpopular, and it wasn't going to pass. And what happened is they went to white vote, the US went to white vote, passed it in a treaty, and then forced the US to adopt it as a law. A trade treaty doesn't have to be voted in most places, in most countries, to get passed into law, or it's forced, their hand is forced. But there were lots of protests about ACTA, and finally the EU got a spine, or certain governments got a spine, and it died. But now we have the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is kind of SOPA reborn. It just seems like these things come through. That doesn't seem to be having much headway in Europe, but Japan, for whatever reason, seems quite keen on it. I think whoever is looking for money from the States suddenly becomes quite keen to support these things. And then we're stuck with them. Another quote that you can see in the PDF about the similarities. And in the States, terrorism has been a really big issue, a big way for the government to just creep into all sorts of things. But there's been a fantastic counter-push, which really has been led by Google. If you don't know about the Google Transparency Report, this started a few years ago, giving statistics about how many requests for identity they were being asked for, how many suppression of websites they were being asked for. It's now expanded massively into a quite useful website. I just happened to put up the page on Google about Facebook, and I don't know if you can see, but it's kind of interesting. 776 requests for takedowns from Microsoft about Facebook on Google. And you can actually click down and it'll show you more about this. Basically, the pressure from Google came from the shift when Google decided to pull out of China. And there was a culture shift inside that organization. And they used this to show that the US actually, in many ways, was as bad as China in censorship, suppression, using military excuses to do what they want. It hasn't caused the government to change much, but it's definitely caused much more awareness. Thanks to Google, actually, of all people, Twitter is a new ally and has been working with EFF to try and craft a privacy policy, a legal agreement with its users that will actually protect privacy, meaning if you Twitter and then you remove a tweet, the government can't get it. And if you Twitter anonymously, they can't figure out who you are. And thus far, it's really depressing. The best lawyers at Twitter and EFF have not been able to craft a privacy policy that the government doesn't find a way around. So the current state of things is because Twitter can retweet things, the government considers it to be completely accessible permanently. So as long as Twitter has the right to retweet things, you have no right to privacy on Twitter. Twitter also fought until the bitter end to not reveal the deleted tweets and the identity of people associated with WikiLeaks who were posting on Twitter, lost, and they decided to stop fighting because the sanctions were going to mount into, well, they were asking for their gross revenue numbers to see just how many tens of millions it should be. So Twitter eventually folded, but is really pushing hard to be in the same sort of Google position of fighting for its users.